I think we'll go ahead and get started, and some people are still trickling in, but I don't want to take up too much of our speakers' time. I am pleased to introduce our speakers for today who are presenting on neurodiversity in the workplace. We have Ben Edwards, Austin Myers, and Hilary Casey. Speaking today, I'm going to let them do their individual introductions about why this topic is important and relevant to them. But I do want to, first of all, welcome them and appreciate the time that they're taking to talk to us today. And also let everyone know that we will have time for questions at the end. If you're in person, feel free to, chime in as appropriate. And if you're on Zoom, we will be monitoring the chat, so you can either raise your hand or drop questions in the chat as we go on. So without further delay, I'll turn it over to our speakers for today.
All right. Hello, and thank you for coming. My name is Austin Myers. I am the communications specialist here at KUCDD. I am a white man with curly brown hair, glasses, and a dark gray shirt.
My name is Hilary Casey. I'm the executive assistant at KUCDD, and I am also brown hair with glasses, but with a red shirt.
My name is Ben Edwards. I'm an assistant researcher at KUCDD. I'm a white man with glasses, brown hair, a beard, a short beard, and I've got also a red shirt because Autism Acceptance Month. This is one of those colors for it, and I have, in addition to one of my granddad's old red shirts, I also have a sort of darkish blue, almost black colored cardigan on.
All right. And as we mentioned previously, we are from the Kansas University Center on Developmental Disabilities, or KUCDD. And a little bit about KUCDD is our mission is to enhance the quality of life, self-determination, and inclusion of people with IDD, or intellectual and developmental disabilities, and their families through our 4 core functions: community service, info dissemination, research, and training and education. And we do so through not only our core functions, but we also do it with our core values in mind, which are doing high quality work, knowing your purpose, seeking diversity, including others, and respecting other people. And with that introduction to what we do at our center out of the way, I'm going to defer it over to my colleague, Ben Edwards, and he's going to give a little bit of background on what neurodiversity is.
Thank you, Austin. So what is neurodiversity? It simply means that there are multiple valid ways for the human brain to be, multiple valid ways to think, behave, communicate, function, understand, and experience. So neurodiversity believes that human beings, just because of their brain type, that does not mean that we are in any way damaged or we need to have a cure or a fix given to us. Neurodiversity is also, it's something that's been used by autistic people and people with cognitive differences for a really long time in a push for the struggle for greater civil rights. So So humankind has developed multiple different ways to multiple different brains as it's, because it's needed them, as it's, spread across the globe, as it's, become a species that has taken on so much more through centuries and centuries. It's needed these ways to survive. So it's been speculated on the topic of neurodiversity. And while I'm at it, I should mention that neurodivergence, which is different from neurodiverse in that neurodiverse means, well, just a term to describe neurologically diverse, as its name suggests. Neurodivergence suggests it means non-neurotypicals, but that's not the only thing that is included under the neurodiversity paradigm. It includes neurotypicals too. I just think, when it comes to diversity, differences like autism, dyslexia, Down syndrome, OCD, all these things have been kind of been really ignored on the topic of diversity. Whereas I think other differences, race, gender, sexual orientation have gotten a little bit more recognition in terms of the diversity they contribute. Neurodivergence, so yeah, neurodivergence, which includes all these differences, it's played a role. As you see here, it's been speculated that autism has thought to have played a role in Polynesian navigation. So think about people hopping from, sailing from one island to another in ships that, or in boats or ships that are nothing like we have today, and they don't have the modern navigational tools. They have to rely on things like their memories, their observation, their quick focus. And yes, observation of things like the stars, birds, just things that modern navigators and modern sailors just don't have to think of quite so much. It's also been said multiple times to have played a role in developing the Silicon Valley, which not too long ago was nothing like it was today. And another thing that's interesting that I've heard is OCD, people with OCD having a role in developing modern hand washing procedures, which I can see as well. I mean, sometimes, yeah, if we don't have different brains, we just don't have our edge, or we just wouldn't have things that are so taken for granted today. So neurodiversity, as I've mentioned, includes neurotypicals too, and it does not exclude people who are considered. A long time ago, there used to be labels like, well, there still is, I don't mean to say it stopped there, but there were labels like, there were functioning labels. Labels like, this person functions, I cringe at the language, but nowadays I know we use terms like low support needs, high support needs, but neurodiversity doesn't exclude any of that. We all need each other, and we all rely on each other in one way or another.
He's still confused. So if he wants to know,
So it was popularized, this term, by an Australian sociologist in 1999 named Judy Singer. She described herself, her mother, and her daughter as likely being somewhere on the autism spectrum. She first used it in her honors thesis, and it was first in print when an American journalist named Hilary Bloom used it in The Atlantic in 1998. But the grounds for this paradigm were laid when an autistic activist, Jim Sinclair, wrote the famous speech, "Don't Mourn for Us." And in this speech, they said, it is not possible to separate the person from their autism. It's a part of who they are. It's almost like, I can't just magically change my hair color. Well, I could do it with dye, or I could make it look like I have different color eyes with, contacts that we have today. But the fact is, they're just things that are a part of us, and we can't just change it. We can't just do the role of nature and change something that has allowed us to survive and thrive for so long. So this paradigm, it's very important to note, it's become more and more recognized as time goes on. So people like behavioral scientists, interventionists, scientists of other kinds, anthropologists, sociologists, and the autistic rights movement have recognized this paradigm and are recognizing it more and more as time goes on. And I think I know it's going to get increased recognition as we go forward in these discussions.
And what you'll see here on the graphic on the next slide is all the many different ways that a neurodiverse person can contribute, not just in the workplace, but in society as a whole, such as people with autism are honest, they're more sensory aware. ADHD are authentic and they're always focused on what they're doing, the innovative thinking on acquired neurodiversity and Tourette syndrome. And it just shows the overlap, all these amazing skills and contributions that they give. And then, of course, we should also be aware of the differences in the neurodivergent persons, such as those involving social cognition, their attention to social cues, as well as their understanding of both social and nonverbal cues and their approach to social problem solving. And then on the non-social side, their amazing working memory, their anticipating planning, adherence to their own routines, and how they regulate themselves personally and emotionally, and talking through situations to keep themselves organized, along with their motor coordination and sequencing. And then also we should be aware that we should also be creating an environment that prevents and or mitigates what's known as masking or camouflaging as much as possible. Now, for those who are wondering, according to the National Autistic Society, masking refers to when a neurodivergent person learns to practice and perform certain behaviors and suppress others in order to mirror the people around them, which can include suppressing their comforting behaviors such as stimming for fear of not fitting in socially, mirroring the behaviors of their neurotypical peers, as well as developing very complex social scripts to get through the day. And this is honestly something I can truly relate to. Before I came to KUCDD, I was pretty much notorious for masking my neurodivergence wherever I went to work out of fear of two reasons. One, the reputation I acquired being lost had my supervisors ever found out that I was neurodivergent and they would stop taking me seriously. And two, it found out later on throughout my career or throughout my time working there, fear of being terminated for not letting them know sooner. And that took a very significant toll on me, both physically and mentally. But I am glad that here at KUCDD, I don't have to worry about that, and I can just be my own genuine self. And then I'm going to defer it to Hilary so she can discuss strengths-based practices to supporting neurodiversity in the workplace.
Yeah, so as Ben and Austin has shared, we've talked about what neurodiversity is, the different traits and how that can look, but how do you actually incorporate that into your workplace and incorporate the different individuals and strengths that we all can bring to the table? Many of the strategies that we address today, they do focus on a lot of executive functioning disorders that many of us have. So a lot of this is going to be something that almost anyone in your workplace is going to be able to relate to some degree, because we all have some sort of struggle with a task or time management. These typically affect neurodiverse individuals a little bit more, depending on the specific individual. But one of the things to recognize is that while we're focusing on neurodiversity, this is something that can benefit your team as a whole and in general. And something to note that when you're doing this, you need to make sure that you're working with the individual directly, because while we're trying to make an open and welcoming environment, tasks or different accommodations are going to vary specific to the individual. What works for me isn't going to necessarily work for Austin or for Ben, and it may not work for any of you. So that's going to be something that as we go through this, we'll talk about different strategies of how do you keep going back to the individual, but also within the team sense and supporting each other. So what we'll talk about is workplace strategies first, and the social supports, task management supports. So when you're looking at the workplace, so we're kind of going like big picture and then kind of working down. So we're looking at what can you do as a culture? So first would be a workplace neurodiversity acceptance training. Like you want to make sure that everyone on your team understands the differences that of other team members are going to be there. They're going to be okay with random fidgets that someone has. They're going to be okay with someone having different ways of calming them down. And that they understand that that's how they're coping to be able to get through different and stressful situations. Some of the things that we also recommend personalize on-the-job training supports. So that could look like you have a mentor that walks through a specific task, and it could be something that they have to do multiple times. Flexible schedules, this is really important because a lot of times any people who are neurodiverse need a little bit more time to rest after, more stressful events or a meeting or something. So allowing those break times and flexible schedules, so that, and it could even be like you have a more strenuous task and give them something a little bit lighter, or like working with them and how they can flex their schedule and their workload to accommodate them, and so they're not feeling burnt out. Accessible technology, this is going to be really important for task management, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Making sure that you have technology that is accessible, but also works for them to be able to manage their tasks and things that they have to do. Working within their strengths and their interest areas. So one way to do this is have regular check-ins. Where I'm at now, both my bosses, Lisa and Carrie, which are amazing, we have regular check-ins every week. They check in, we look at my tasks, see what exactly where I'm at. Do I have any questions? Like having that regularly to check in, make sure I'm on task and I understand everything is really important for this. Because I don't know about you guys, I have really bad time blindness. And so like I have to be able to have that regular checkup sometimes to make sure I'm on task and doing what I need to do. And it's also within the time frame of what they're expecting as well. We also want to think about how to structure the team to ensure that you're supporting the diverse skill sets. So this could be by pairing up individuals that have different skill sets. So I typically am a little bit better organizing different things, and Austin's really creative. And so we work really well together to be able to get tasks done where he can, knock out some really creative stuff, and then I can help keep it organized or like follow up on things. So like there are different ways that you can take the different strengths that team members have and put them together to be able to get the outcome that you're looking for. So then you have task management support strategies. So some of the things with this, and something even myself I'm learning on, direct, clear instructions. I'm actually really bad at this in some regards. Austin has, I've been learning a lot from working with Austin, because even though we're both autistic, like our brains work completely differently in how we interpret something. And so what might be clear to me isn't clear to him. So a lot of times there's a lot of back and forth, making sure you understand exactly what you're trying to say, or that they understand what you're trying to say. And something that we're also working on at the center is providing job aids that have visuals as well as just written instructions, because we all have different learning abilities and just how we learn too. And then so breaking instructions into smaller pieces or chunking, and you can do this in a variety of ways. You can do it by taking a large task and just hand off like one piece at a time, or maybe 2 pieces at a time, and then allowing them to get through it until you provide more tasks to them. Another thing would be assisting with organization, because this is definitely something that, all of us struggle with organizing. We are all really busy and have a lot that we have on our plates. And so this would be another example of, providing an assistance or something to help get them organized. You could even provide templates where like, this is how we do something here, just copy this over and for a future task. And then the last thing we'll talk about is the social support strategies. So providing positive tone feedback. Nobody likes feedback. It's very hard to get feedback. But one of the great things that we have at our center is we all try to really frame it around, we want everyone to do the best they can and do better. And when you do that, be like, you did a great job at this. I think we can also do it maybe this way. And that would be that might be easier, more efficient, or it might be more clear. Like there's ways that you can frame it to, still boost up your team to let them know that you're doing a great job, but we also know that, we can see improvement, see where you, can do more. And so going back to the be clear, concrete, and consistent. So say what you mean what you say, follow through with it, and do it the same way every time. That's definitely a really big thing. It can be kind of hard if like you're you say one thing and it meant something else, and because we're very literal, we don't understand everything very seriously. And also like human metaphors and sarcasm, I'm terrible at that. I literally have to tell myself, oh, they were being sarcastic, and then I laugh like half a minute later after the fact. Nonverbal facial cues and expressions can be difficult to interpret. And this is more important to recognize if you're on Zoom, that sometimes those don't translate, and it's harder to translate too when you're on like a virtual platform. Doesn't mean don't use them, because like Austin and myself have been sometimes prefer having Zoom, because that can also take some of that social pressure off. That is just something to be aware that while you're on a virtual meeting, you might have to get more clarification or do more repeating to make sure that whatever your message is clear. And then for like setting up for social success, you want to encourage participation in meetings. By inviting them to speak in their areas of interest. And the best way that we kind of thought about doing that was, when you're in like a one-on-one or a check-in, like you talk to them beforehand, be like, hey, I think that this would be a really good opportunity for you to speak up on this topic. And like, you don't want to call someone out on it, but be like, hey, if you have an opportunity, I think you should, this would be a really good opportunity. So that it builds their confidence and, gives them that confidence, okay, yeah, I can talk on this. And, you trust that I can do this. And then also assist with social inclusion. One of the things that we wanted to really point out with this was for we have members on our team that have AAC devices, and it's not very common at all for that in work settings, but it's really important because they do take longer to communicate. So you want to make sure that there's a standard that you are going to give time. So you have a cue or some way of knowing when that individual wants to speak, and then everyone waits. And because that's our biggest thing, as Austin said earlier, like we want to include all voices, and in order to do that, sometimes you have to, give additional time, which is nothing, adding more time to like your work and everything that you do. And then I'm going to hand it over to Ben, and he can finish us off.
All right, so remember, most importantly, these strategies, they need to work for neurodivergent people. I mean, they're not just, we shouldn't just be doing them to just, feel good, feel like, okay, we're doing this thing with diversity in mind, or it makes us look like we're, doing something to really be inclusive or whatever, when we're without actually, really including people. It needs to work for neurodivergent employees is the bottom line. It's important to follow up with individuals and to ask if the supports that are provided are working or if changes are needed. It's important to engage leadership, neurodivergent employees, and others when developing strategies. And these strategies, they may take time. I mean, you might have to tweak them as you go along. They're not just sure to work. And like Hilary said, each neurodivergent person is different. And so, yeah, just the thing to remember is to be patient and know that you're learning new skills. And as you do this, I think you will find your workplace, much more suitable to a wide variety of people with a wide variety of brains, but also with just a wide variety of differences in general. And I think that's just going to make everything about everything with the work that any organization does better. Was that the end?
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, if you want to say more, go ahead.
Well, I think we've covered quite a lot, but I don't know, I can't say whether Austin or Hilary have anything to say, about this topic more, but I guess if not, we're certainly open to questions.
I have a question. So I know you guys really focused on workplace neurodiversity and how to help neurodivergent people feel more comfortable and be included in the workplace, which I think is phenomenal. I am a mom of 2 children on the spectrum, and so this just makes me really happy And if you don't know the answer to this question, please defer me, go ask someone else. But how do we build upon this? Because it's really great that once we get into the workplace, they're going to feel accepted. But right now they're in college and they're struggling, like on this campus, being accepted as a neurodivergent person, or as high schoolers. Like there's like, how do we get society to kind of buy into this? It's a big nasty question, I know.
I've often said, maybe one way, I've often speculated, maybe one way we'll appreciate neurodiversity is if we ever experienced what the world was like without it or something, or without one, if we appreciate it. I think if we were ever to be without any one of our different neurotypes, autism, Down syndrome, OCD, or any of these, if we were to suddenly lose it as a species or as any individual society, I think we'd feel the effects pretty quickly. I hope that doesn't happen, but I just think the important thing is to just keep educating people on neurodiversity and learning about as much as can be learned about it. That's what I see as helping, short of anything like a nuclear catastrophe or a complete apocalypse or just some virus that we haven't already seen that just wreaks havoc. And I think, short of something like that happening, I think we just need to sort of let people know that the very, sometimes the very ground you're standing on is because of neurodiversity or something like that.
That was great.
Thank you.
I think to add to that, it's gonna be just a lot more of stuff like this, and it could be out in the world and just more awareness, acceptance, talking to adults with autism and ADHD or other neurodiverse that have different brains or whatever. Just because I think the biggest thing is there's so much more stigma still around it. And also I know a lot more, you have parents who don't quite understand or see the potential in their children. And so there's a lot of misconception. So I think talking to a lot more parents and teachers and like how like there are adults, and especially now we're having a lot more and more adults getting diagnosed, men and women, later in life because their kids are getting diagnosed. And so it's like, and they're successful. And so it's showing that you can still have these differences and be successful, because I think there's always been a stigma of like, if you have any of these differences, you're not going to be successful. You're always going to struggle. You're always going to need supports, which everybody needs support at some point in their life, which is, so it's kind of silly to say that, but I think just trying more the awareness, acceptance, and just talking and, being empathetic with people and realizing like, it's still hard, but like we're, obviously we're all really successful and do really well and have friends and great colleagues and stuff, which I'm happy. So that's important to me.
We have a couple of questions on Zoom. One is in the chat. How can we better support individuals prepare and be ready for an interview to get into the workplace?
This is something I am referencing from someone I interviewed at the SOAR conference back in October. But working with that person to do like practice interviews or practicing through those tasks. I remember this person mentioning that when he was preparing for a job, getting a job at a movie theater, his job coach would work with him tearing tickets in the library.
Yeah, I also, I script everything out and I will like go through and write everything down. I don't necessarily like look at it, even though I spend all the time doing it, but it's there. And so like for all of my interviews, like I just Google what are all the interview questions you could possibly be asked and answer all of them. And like a way that sounds natural for me as an individual. That's how I've been doing it. And then also like, I also, if I've been in interviews, I try to write down questions that maybe I didn't have before. So like I have a whole list of questions that are like all interview questions and all the different ways that they can be asked.
I think I know when it comes to people with an autistic brain like myself, there's often confusion around certain questions like, tell us how you, by the time you faced a conflict and how it was resolved. Also questions like, how would your friends describe you? Or when did you first become interested in this field? It tends to, for a lot of us, it tends to force us to go back onto our, completely linear memory. Or a question like, how many jelly beans do you think is in this jar? That's like,
That's a conflict.
yeah, and I know, I get the thinking, like, they're trying to sort of see people's like spatial or logical reasoning. But I think it's not so much that people who are getting ready for interviews will necessarily find the perfect answer so much, but I think the thing to be kind of be aware of how interview is conducted by neurotypical people often have kind of these unspoken intentions or designs that I mean, no one should expect you to guess the number of jelly beans in a jar. That's just ridiculous. But maybe maybe an employer might be impressed if maybe people can be prepared to know that employer might be impressed when you sort of, have some kind of mathematical system measuring the, estimating the dimensions of the jelly beans in the jar and the ratio or something like that. And or just sort of be able to understand that when your employers are looking for something, rather than just flat out ask you, they're going to sort of meander around it with all sorts of questions aimed to get at that, but they're not going to just directly ask you like, okay, questions that could be so much simpler, but aren't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of on that, that's actually a good point, like looking at questions like that and saying, like, working with someone, be like, okay, this is what they mean by this question. And also, because one of my first interviews I ever did, they asked me questions like that and I kept talking about my cat. So, yeah, talk with whoever you're working with and be like, make sure to always bring it back to whatever it is they're interviewing for. So like, bring the focus back, because I didn't have that. So I definitely did not get that job. But stuff like that, like work with them on like, what is the intent of the question, and then work with them to, try to make sure that they're refocusing it to the job or whatever the role that they're trying to get.
Valerie, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Hi, Hilary, Austin, and Ben. Sorry, I'm not there in person. House things today. But I just wanted to say, and this kind of goes back to getting this information into the hands of teachers and schools and training programs. I think that what you guys have presented on is critical information that should get into our training programs at KU. I've actually been thinking about this, as I think at least Hilary knows that I lead the the master's transition online program in the SPED department. And I think it's critical that our teachers hear from you guys and understand and begin to gain some understanding as they move through their training programs. So I just wanted to say that I greatly appreciate this presentation today. And I guess my only question is, I'd love to talk to you further if you're interested in doing some videos and thinking about what this might look like in our master's online transition program.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Yep. All right, I'm in the back. I'll go ahead and just ask my question. So I'm gonna take the perspective of an employer here. Not necessarily that I agree, right? But one of the challenges for employers in individualizing supports is there's a lot of either personnel or time overhead or sometimes financial overhead.
So I would be curious to hear your all thoughts on, particularly as we think about AI and the rapid development of AI, how you see the potential transformation for AI and different softwares that could potentially help you all in your employment positions, to help then employers with managing those time, personnel, financial. That's a big question, and I can word it differently. So how could AI potentially help neurodivergent people in the workplace?
I mean, it could help anybody. Because I've worked with someone from AUCD who uses it. And they weren't neurodiverse at all. I don't know, AI is a bit of a touchy subject, I feel, in general, just because that could be taking away manpower from any job, not necessarily just people who are neurodiverse. Do you guys have any strong feelings about that?
I honestly agree, like, it could definitely take away that manpower. And from a creative's perspective too, it could potentially take away a lot of those creative jobs too.
Yes, art, definitely. We don't like AI. If you're an artist, don't like it.
I have to say, I 100% agree that from an artist's perspective, AI is toxic in a lot of ways. I don't think that in terms of supporting people in the workplace, AI is necessarily going to be a bad fit for autistic people or neurodivergent people. I think what was not always said, though, is that AI isn't always made with, whether it's GPS, whether it's something else, it's not always made with the autistic brain or neurodivergent or other kind of brains than the neurotypical brain in mind. Like, I think of autocorrect, you know, I have what so many people call so many special interests. So when I'm looking something up online, it will correct something to something that's, I guess it's far more likely a neurotypical will find themselves interested in. And I'm like, no, I know what I meant to type in. And it's I think it's oftentimes based, and I think just what I see corrected on AI, I kind of think there's maybe I think maybe there's sometimes a lot of times things like cultural biases, or, you know, if it's a name that you don't often hear among your neighbors or something, that so often gets corrected. I think there's AI, I don't necessarily think is an absolutely unsustainable way to support the needs of a neurodivergent person, but I think there needs to be a lot of neurodivergent, like consulting, focus group testing, representation, and a lot of other things before we can really look too far into that kind of approach.
That's a great point. I was gonna add to that, because you're talking about like the autocorrect stuff. So like Microsoft does have a thing where it'll read your sentences and you can make it more formal. So I think in some regards, like if you're thinking AI or like chat GTP, is that what it is? Yeah. Like it can definitely help. It may help. It depends on the individual. So like if someone puts in a sentence and you're like, make this sound more formal, it could help, like if that person's then gonna take that feedback from the AI as like, okay, this is probably how I could be more formal in talking, because, you know, or whatever, like, that could be a way to help as a mentoring type of technology, but it's definitely nuanced.
And kind of going off on a slight tangent there, I have a couple of colleagues at Temple AI that are using AI, that are experimenting with AI for just that, primarily making the language more accessible to the neurodiverse community.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
Can I add something too, just from the perspective of a supervisor? I would too, that I mean, I think there's always going to be a human element to supervisory, and I think supervising people that think differently, I think, you know, that there's power in that, and that we shouldn't, you know, hesitate from looking too much at technological solutions to that, because I think that human element is so important. Like some of the projects that we've written and are running came from supervisory meetings where I learned something new from the perspective of someone who had different experiences and thought different, and we kind of took that and ran with it. So I think there, just wanted to be sure that, like, to say,
Yeah,
and
right.
that's not, yeah.
I think, Ben, your answer that we can't create the technologies without the representation is also
Mhm.
really important.
So Renee Jameson has a question, and Evan, you kind of address this a little bit, but she's asking if anyone has observations regarding how advocating for neurodiversity in the workplace has impacted everyone or how it has not. So you kind of touched on that with, you know, your observation that having a neurodiverse team has taught you things that you wouldn't have otherwise learned. It's panelists or anybody else have.
And I was just gonna, sorry, I couldn't, my raising my hand feature wasn't working, but I was just gonna say that I think the basis of my question really is, have you noticed any of those big shifts in more of the advocacy around neurodiversity? Because so many of these strategies could be applicable to everyone, right? Or best practice around work and organization and communication. And have you seen those shifts, or have you not, surprisingly? I don't know if that makes sense.
Right, has implementing the supports for neurodiversity in the workplace benefited people at the team level?
That's the question.
Yeah, I think that's more or less what the question is.
I mean, I think it has definitely
Me
benefited.
too. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, we have a lot of different task management technologies at KUCAD. We also just, one of the things that we're working on, I mentioned it, like job aids, like different ways to try and support all the different ways in which we all learn. And also, how do you make information accessible from a university standpoint? We don't make information accessible. It's so hard to find information about anything like within the university. So how do we, at least within our team, put that in an area that then everyone can get that easily without spending extra time? Because time is precious, there's limited amount of it. So I think, and yeah, that's something that like I've personally been working on. So yeah, either of you have.
Yeah, I think it's definitely benefited, it's benefited, I think from looking at from the point of view of work I do, information inputting, I think really benefits from it. I mean, it's really hard to, I mean, I know in a lot of these slides, you know, and a lot of I think in a lot of talk about neurodiversity in general, I mean, it can sometimes get lost how vast these applications of neurodiversity, how vast these benefits of neurodiversity, the areas, how vast the areas they affect are. I mean, because every neurodivergent person is different, and it would be a mistake, I think, to say, oh, you hire more neurodivergent, you hire more autistic workers, your company will flourish in this respect, when in reality it will benefit in just so many ways that I think it's hard to pigeonhole. I just think a lot of the understanding of neurodiversity at the moment are just kind of starting points, not end points. But I think, you know, I can only speak for myself, and when it comes to, I can only speak for my own individual abilities when it comes to like my experience of seeing my neurodivergence benefiting a workplace, but I definitely think it has. It's meant that, it's meant not just that I connect to a lot of our study participants, but also that I just bring a lot of my skills into the work I do. And that's why I think it's critical that such support systems, as we mentioned, are there.
Question. So a lot of your talk focused on, the different types of supports that people may need and how those may benefit not just neurodivergent people, but also, neurotypical people. And I'm wondering, I think different people have different support needs, and I think that sometimes those support needs may be conflicting. So I'm going to provide an example. Some people may really thrive in a very social and workplace environment where there are a lot of, outside of work activities to maintain collegiality. And then for other people, they may have social anxieties, and those kinds of settings may be really hard for them to navigate, or may be very stressful for them to navigate. So do you have suggestions for kind of how to balance the different support needs and sometimes conflicting support needs of individuals on a team?
So do you guys, anything for that? Because I might have something.
I do see the point to this question, and I think probably having struggled with social anxiety myself, as well as more generalized anxiety, I think my approach to anxiety has sort of become, just face whatever it is that's causing the anxiety. I know that's not gonna be, I know that's easier said than done, and for a lot of people, I think with anxiety, it's way more complex than that. I do think, I guess one of the first things to do is just kind of, learn what exactly, it is, that might prevent people from, say, from, feeling comfortable in gatherings, if there is a way that people could feel comfortable in gatherings, and I'm not entirely sure that's true. I mean, I think, yeah, I guess there's no really simple one size fits all answer to this question, given the variety of different workplaces and people. But I'm just certainly glad that I've had people who, neurodivergence in my family, as well as people who've worked heavily with neurodivergence. That's definitely given me sort of a way to look at it that I know not everyone has.
So my first question is the social engagements required for the job? If it's not actually required for the job, then I don't think that should be an expectation of the person. And then if it is, that's something that has to be discussed during the interview process, and make sure that they understand that that's a part of the job description, that you are going to be expected to do this, so that then they can make that decision. Because while yes, we're asking for supports, I personally am not gonna put myself in a position that I'm not comfortable with. And if that, I am like Ben, I have social anxiety. I've been anxious all day. Everyone's seen me going crazy this morning. But I also, and to an extent, I also enjoy this. And so I'm gonna push through that. And that's my personal choice to do it. So that's where I think I don't know if that's the right term, dichotomy, or just the differences of the two, where yes, I have this, yes, I might need more support in this. So I have all these things, I'm doing this. But you're still also getting the job done. I know this is an expectation of me. So that would be how I would approach that.
I'm pretty much the exact same way, but it's also a matter of working with the supervisor to make sure, okay, I kind of need just being upfront in both sides of the coin.
Yep.
Like the supervisor being upfront with you on what's expected of the job, but you also being upfront about what support needs you might need and coming to that happy medium, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I can ask one more.
Go for it.
So this is one of those ones that you guys said you hate. But I won't ask about jelly beans. If you had a neurodivergent on the spectrum job seeker in front of you and they were getting ready to start a job, what advice would you give them as they're entering the workforce?
I guess for me, it would depend on, like, I guess if I were maybe like, say, their supervisor, well, one thing that would definitely depend on is how much power do I have kind of overall? Like, am I their direct supervisor or am I their like overall boss? Because that can certainly influence the level, my ability to provide support. I would, if, you know, considering that, assuming that wasn't an issue, I would want to say, and I'd really want to mean it too, you know, if you have, you know, needs that you feel aren't being met, I hope you can feel comfortable talking to me about these, because that, I mean, that kind of environment has probably, you know, it would have saved me in many situations at work. It has saved me in many situations at the work that I've been at. Or maybe something a little more geared to how maybe you can ask for said support, and what to do if like people at your work are just really not getting it, something like that. If there is, you know, if there is a way that, you know, you can, if it is even that simple at all, which in so many workplaces where I've seen just autistics not get accommodated, it's just like they have to jump through so many hoops just to get like, just to be allowed to do something that helps with sensory issues or something.
Something as simple as like earplugs or
Right.
something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think on that too, it's like understanding like as an individual, what I'm comfortable with in a job setting. Like I've done a lot of different jobs and through all of that, like I've jumped around and realized what I do like, what I don't like, what I'm willing to work on, what I'm not willing to work on. Like also like, I feel like one of the stereotypes is like it's like this black and white thinking and like, which I think comes more down to like a moral value of like, what am I morally like willing to give up and what I'm not going to, and it's very strong. And so, excuse me, like that's definitely one of those things where like I have left jobs because like I don't agree with this, I'm not doing it. And so I think that as an individual, if you're trying to help someone going into the job force, like really figuring out what is important to them, what are the things that they're willing to compromise on or not compromise on or fight for or not fight for is really important in a job too.
Back up with that question and ask like, for somebody who's neurodivergent or for somebody who's, you know, advocating for somebody who's neurodivergent, do you have recommendations for, you know, how people can be successful in advocating for the supports that neurodivergent people need in the workplace if, for example, their supervisors or workplace is not openly accommodating?
I don't know if I have much experience. I've been very lucky.
I have been fairly lucky too in terms of having, I mean, I've definitely in past jobs, I've definitely run into people here and there who were just like, couldn't see their way to, you know, just making some accommodations that might have been fairly simple, but in the majority of jobs I've had, well, all jobs I've had, I mean, that I've been in for more than, I'd say, a year or so, I definitely and got a taste of, what kind of its company culture was like, I can say that there have been, usually when it comes to like people who are in charge of things related to my performance, there is a willingness to accommodate to at least a certain degree.
And I share that sentiment with both of them, with the exception of one job that was not as accommodating. But for the most part, I have always felt comfortable being able to talk to my supervisor for supports, to let them know, hey, I don't really feel comfortable doing this. Is there any way I can work out some sort of alternative or some sort of compromise, if that makes sense?
Right. Yeah, and I agree, with the sentiment of like, if somebody's evaluating your performance, then it makes sense for you to ask for accommodations so that you can meet the expectations of that, standard, the performance standard. So maybe like using that kind of as a talking point if you're like negotiating for supports to say like, I will work more efficiently or more productively if I have.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's very nuanced because it depends on the company and the job. Do they have an HR department? Do they follow ADA? Because technically, all jobs should be accommodating and providing an accommodation, which we know that's not how it reality is, but yeah, I think that just goes back to something I said earlier, where it's just gonna come down to the individual, like, is this something that you can fight for within this company? If it's not, that's a compromise that you have to decide on and move on.
We have time for like one more question.
Fine, fine.
As far as like helping, like moving forward and creating more awareness and acceptance, where do you feel like the onus is in the workplace? Like, do you think that needs to come from like management down? Do you think that needs to come from like higher up? I'm just wondering where the training needs to happen and where just like where it starts.
I feel like that's a chicken or egg question.
Great.
I feel when it comes to being open to making adjustments to workplace supports and management, I feel the onus is definitely on people in higher up positions. I think when it comes to advocating for said accommodations, it's often on the employee who's asking for said accommodations. But I think it definitely needs to get to a point where it doesn't become a head-on struggle to get accommodations, because advocating to someone only sometimes goes as far as, say, the person is willing to change is the thing. So if it's a completely unaccommodating culture, just being phenomenal at advocating for your needs isn't going to necessarily do much good in that case.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, because as a business, if you're gonna have a business, and this is even just simple as like social media, we see it all the time on social media, or at least I do. Like, you'll have an Instagram influencer, TikTok influencer, they don't have captions. Like, that's on that individual who created that content to make that. If you're a business owner and you have this business and you have people and you want to hire someone and then they ask for accommodations, like, it is on you as a business owner to support them in that. Especially if it's not taking away from anything that you're doing as a business, and it's just gonna help support your person so that you can keep them. I think a lot of us realize that people are like the greatest, I don't know what the term is exactly, like we're the ones that are providing the work, and without us, like, it's not getting done. Not just neurodiverse, just anybody in general. So I think that that's something that some employers are not they think of it as, yes, it's manpower, yes, it's money, but you're also gonna spend more time, more money having to retrain or rehire somebody if you're not willing to accommodate someone that you already have who's already willing to work for you and do all these things. And then, yeah, also being comfortable, like if I'm not comfortable, like partly it is on me to be comfortable with talking about, you know, what I need and my comfort levels, because that is also HR thing, you can't ask all those questions. But I think if just in general, if more people are just more accepting and more open, like we wouldn't have to have these conversations. Like it would just be expected that, hey, if I have something and I need a support, I'm going to get it.
We're right at 5 o'clock, so we'll wrap up for today, but thank you to our panelists for a wonderful talk and discussion on neurodiversity in the workplace. And thanks all both in person and on Zoom for joining today.